I've always sought refuge in the solitude of the lake, deep in the forest near my cabin. There's something about the stillness that calms me, the way the water mirrors the sky and the trees stand like silent sentinels. It's a place where the world's chaos can't touch me. At least that's what I used to believe. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon and the last rays of light painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, I found myself alone on the water, just me and the slow, rhythmic sound of my paddle slicing through the lake's surface. I was casting my line, not really caring if I caught anything, when I noticed it, a faint, flickering glow on the opposite shore. It was strange. There weren't supposed to be any other cabins around here. Curiosity piqued, I stopped paddling and squinted across the water. I could just make out the shapes of people, their outlines barely visible in the dim light. They were huddled together, as if performing some sort of ritual. My heart rate quickened as I watched one of them drag a large, heavy object toward the edge of the water. My breath caught in my throat as they heaved it into the lake. The splash echoed across the water, unnaturally loud in the stillness. I knew I should turn back, row away, and forget what I'd seen, but something rooted me in place. I waited until they disappeared into the trees, then paddled silently toward the spot. My hands trembled as I lowered my fishing net into the water, my stomach twisting with a dread I couldn't quite understand. The net snagged on something solid, and with a heave, I pulled it to the surface. My heart nearly stopped. It was a bundle wrapped in thick, sodden cloth, tied with rough rope. Every instinct screamed at me to let it go, but I couldn't. I had to know. I untied the rope, hands shaking uncontrollably. The cloth fell away, and what I saw made my blood run cold. A face, pale and bloated, eyes wide open in terror. It was a man, his features distorted by whatever horror had befallen him. I dropped the bundle back into the water, my mind racing. Who were those people? What had they done? And most terrifying of all, why had they left? I was too far from the cabin to make it back before dark, and the thought of being caught out here alone with whatever was lurking in the woods was unbearable. I rowed as fast as I could, my eyes darting to the shore every few seconds, expecting to see them standing there, watching me. But when I finally reached the dock, the only thing that greeted me was the whisper of the wind through the trees. I stumbled out of the canoe, my legs trembling, and ran up to the cabin, bolting the door behind me. That night, I sat by the window watching the lake, waiting for something, anything to happen. But the silence was absolute, suffocating. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man's face, his lifeless eyes staring back at me. Days passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The woods, once my sanctuary, now felt oppressive, hostile. I stayed inside as much as I could, avoiding the lake, avoiding the night. But then the dreams started. Every night I saw them, the people from the shore, standing at the edge of my bed, their faces shrouded in darkness. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I was paralyzed, forced to watch as they reached for me, their cold hands closing around my throat. I don't know how much longer I can stay here. I can feel them getting closer, can sense them just beyond the trees, waiting for the right moment. I've considered leaving, but something tells me it won't matter where I go. They'll find me. I wish I'd never seen that light, never gone out on the water that night. Now I can't escape the silent depths, and I fear they'll drag me under before long. The cabin was supposed to be a retreat, a place where I could get away from the chaos of life and just breathe. It's nestled deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. No cell service, no internet, just the sound of nature and the occasional rustling of leaves. It was perfect, or at least it was. The first night there, I noticed something strange. I was sitting on the porch, enjoying the stillness, when I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was just a deer or maybe a raccoon, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. Just the trees swaying gently in the breeze. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to my imagination. But as the night wore on, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I couldn't shake the sense that someone, or something, was out there, hidden among the trees just beyond the reach of the porch light. I went inside, locked the door, and tried to convince myself it was nothing. After all, I was in the middle of nowhere. Who would be out here? But that night, as I lay in bed, I heard it. The soft crunch of leaves, the snap of a twig. It was subtle, almost too quiet to notice, but it was there. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened, trying to pinpoint the source. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling the cabin. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I drifted off, I was jolted awake by the sound of movement outside. By morning, I was exhausted but determined to figure out what was going on. I spent the day exploring the woods around the cabin, looking for any signs of someone or something that might have been out there. But the ground was undisturbed, the trees silent. There was no sign of anything unusual. And that night, I kept the lights off and stayed by the window watching the darkness. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just being paranoid. But then, just as I was about to give up and go to bed, I saw it, a shadow, tall and thin, moving between the trees. It was too far away to make out any details, but there was no mistaking it. Someone was out there, watching me. I grabbed a flashlight and threw open the door, shining the beam into the woods. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling with fear and anger. "Show yourself!" But there was no response. The shadow was gone, swallowed by the darkness. I stood there, heart racing, the beam of the flashlight shaking in my hand. I was about to turn back when I heard it, a low, guttural growl, so deep it seemed to vibrate the ground beneath my feet. I didn't wait to see what it was. I ran back inside, bolting the door behind me. Whatever was out there, it wasn't human. The growling continued, circling the cabin, growing louder, more aggressive. It was as if whatever it was knew I was scared, and it was enjoying it. I sat in the corner, clutching a kitchen knife, praying for morning to come. But the night dragged on, the darkness pressing in from all sides. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. Just outside, watching, waiting. By the time the first light of dawn broke through the trees, the growling had stopped, but the fear lingered. I packed my things that morning, ready to leave and never look back. But as I stepped out onto the porch, I froze. There, carved into the wood of the door, were deep, jagged scratches, like something with claws had tried to get in. I didn't wait to see what it was. I left the cabin and never returned. But the feeling of being watched hasn't left me. Even now, back in the city, I can't shake the sense that something followed me back, something that's still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. I've always been drawn to the quiet places, the ones where you can be alone with your thoughts. That's why I bought the house on the edge of town, near the old abandoned cemetery. It was cheap, secluded, and exactly what I needed after the stress of the last few years. The first few weeks were peaceful, almost too peaceful. I spent my days fixing up the house, exploring the overgrown garden, and taking long walks through the nearby woods. At night, I'd sit by the fireplace, enjoying the silence. But then the whispers started. It was subtle at first, just a faint murmur at the edge of my hearing, like the wind rustling through the leaves. I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just the house settling or the distant sound of traffic. But as the days went on, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They came at night, when the world was quiet and the darkness pressed in around me. I'd be lying in bed on the verge of sleep when I'd hear them, soft, insistent voices, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. They seemed to be coming from the walls, from the shadows that pooled in the corners of the room. At first, I tried to ignore them, telling myself it was just my imagination, that I was tired, stressed. But the whispers wouldn't stop. They followed me. From room to room, growing louder, more urgent. It felt like they were trying to tell me something important, but I couldn't make out the words. Then one night, I decided to confront them. I turned off all the lights, sat in the middle of the living room, and waited. The house was silent at first, but then the whispers began, low and urgent, surrounding me from all sides. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What do you want?" The whispers didn't stop, but they seemed to change, becoming more agitated, almost angry. I felt a chill run down my spine as the shadows in the room seemed to grow darker, more oppressive. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath misting in the air. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized that I wasn't alone, that whatever was whispering in the shadows was real. I stood up, backing away toward the door, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if they were trying to keep me there. The shadows seemed to pulse, reaching out toward me, and I could feel a coldness creeping up my legs, rooting me to the spot. Desperately, I fumbled for the light switch, my fingers trembling as I flipped it on. The room was instantly bathed in the harsh glow of the overhead light, and the whispers stopped. The shadows retreated to the corners, but the chill in the air remained, and I could still feel eyes on me, watching from the darkness. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, every light in the house turned on, waiting for the dawn. When the first rays of sunlight filtered through the windows, the oppressive feeling lifted, but the memory of the whispers stayed with me. I knew I couldn't stay in that house any longer. Whatever was there, it wasn't going to let me go easily. But as I packed my bags, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the shadows were still lurking, just out of sight. As I drove away, the house grew smaller in my rearview mirror, but the whispers stayed with me, echoing in my mind. I thought leaving would be the end of it, that I could leave the past behind and start fresh somewhere new. But the whispers followed me. No matter where I go, I can still hear them, just at the edge of my hearing, growing louder every night. I see shadows moving in places they shouldn't be, feel cold fingers brush against my skin when I'm alone. I've tried everything to get rid of them, salt, prayers, even burning sage, but nothing works. I'm running out of options, and I'm scared. I don't know how much longer I can hold on before the shadows finally catch up to me. They've been patient, waiting in the dark, whispering their secrets. I fear that when they do, I won't be able to resist anymore. When I first moved into the old farmhouse, it seemed like a dream come true. I'd been searching for a place like this for years, a quiet, isolated spot where I could work on my art in peace. The house was run down, sure, but it had character, and the price was too good to pass up. The first few weeks were blissful. I spent my days painting in the sunlit rooms, the only sounds the distant chirping of birds and the wind in the trees. At night, I'd sit by the fire, sketching ideas for my next piece, feeling more inspired than I had in years. But then the strange things started happening. It began with little things. A brush that I swore I'd left on the table would be on the floor, or a window I'd closed would be open in the morning. At first, I chalked it up to forgetfulness, the result of being so absorbed in my work. But the incidents became more frequent, more unsettling. One night, I was painting late into the evening, the house dark except for the light in my studio. As I worked, I felt a sudden, inexplicable chill in the air. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I had the overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone. I turned, half expecting to see someone standing in the doorway, but there was nothing, just the empty hallway stretching into darkness. I shook my head, trying to dispel the unease, and went back to my painting. But the feeling wouldn't go away. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a shadow moving across the wall, just beyond the reach of the light. It was quick, barely there for a second, but it was enough to send a jolt of fear through me. I jumped up, knocking over my easel, and ran to the light switch, flooding the room with light. The shadow was gone, but the chill remained. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I'd been working too hard and needed some rest. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Something was in the house with me. Over the next few days, the disturbances escalated. I'd hear footsteps in the hallway at night, slow and deliberate, stopping just outside my door. Objects would move on their own, paintbrushes, books, even furniture. I started locking my bedroom door at night, but that did little to ease my fear. The worst part was the whispers. They started softly, barely audible, just as I was drifting off to sleep. At first, I couldn't make out the words, but they grew louder, more insistent, until I couldn't ignore them. They spoke in a language I didn't understand, a harsh, guttural sound that filled me with dread. One night I woke up to find my bedroom door wide open, the whispers louder than ever, surrounding me. The air was frigid, my breath visible in the darkness. I sat up, clutching the blanket to my chest, and saw it, a figure standing at the foot of my bed. Barely more than a shadow, but undeniably there. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. The figure stayed there watching me, its presence oppressive, suffocating. The whispers filled my head, driving me to the brink of panic until suddenly they stopped. The figure was gone, the room silent. I left the farmhouse the next morning, abandoning my paintings, my supplies, everything. I couldn't stay there, not with whatever was in that house. I've been staying with a friend ever since, but I haven't told them what happened. I don't want to talk about it, don't want to relive it. But even now, far away from that place, I can still feel it watching me, waiting. Every night I lock my door and leave the lights on, but I know it's only a matter of time before the whispers start again. And when they do, I don't know if I'll be able to escape this time. Join us next time as we delve into more tales of terror and suspense, exploring the darkest corners of the human psyche and the supernatural forces that seek to exploit our deepest fears. Until then, remember to keep the lights on and never venture into the shadows alone.